The strange thing about the photograph was how ordinary it looked at first. It was a quiet Philadelphia morning, and Bradley was sitting at his desk, going through emails before a meeting, when a picture from an unknown number appeared on his phone. He almost deleted it without opening it. Then he saw Johanna. She was standing outside a neighborhood building with a bag over her shoulder, and beside her was a little boy. Bradley zoomed in. The boy was holding something Bradley hadn't seen in 7 years, but he knew exactly what it was. His hand stopped moving. He looked at the picture again, then called the woman he hadn't spoken to in months. When Johanna finally answered, Bradley asked quietly, "Johanna, who is that boy?" She didn't answer. After a few seconds, she said, "If you're going to ask me that, you need to come here alone." Welcome to Daily Comfort Stories, my wonderful family. I'm truly grateful to have you here. If you're new, comment your time and where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe as we continue sharing meaningful stories together. And that was the beginning of a conversation that would make Bradley question something he had spent 7 years trying very hard not to question. By 6:30 on most mornings, Bradley's office was already awake. Not because he was there. He usually was. The lights on the 32nd floor of his Philadelphia headquarters came on automatically before sunrise, and by the time Bradley stepped out of the elevator, there would already be coffee waiting on the corner of his desk. His assistants knew he preferred it black, no sugar, and they knew better than to ask whether he wanted breakfast. He rarely ate before 10. There was always another email, another decision, another problem that somebody believed only Bradley could solve. That morning was no different. He walked past the glass conference rooms without slowing down. Through one wall, 2 executives were speaking in low voices over a spreadsheet. Another employee stood outside Bradley's office, holding a folder against his chest, waiting for permission to interrupt. Bradley noticed him. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. The man nodded immediately. 5 minutes was the kind of promise Bradley was still good at keeping. It was the larger promises that had always caused trouble. He entered his office, placed his phone beside his laptop, and looked through the windows. Philadelphia was still waking up below him. Traffic moved slowly along the streets. A few buildings caught the pale morning light, while most of the city still looked gray and tired. Bradley had spent years building his company high enough that he could look down on all of it. He sometimes wondered when that had stopped feeling impressive. His company had started as a small operation in Philadelphia. Now it handled technology and logistics contracts across the country. Financial magazines occasionally put his photograph beside words like visionary and disciplined. Interviewers liked asking him about sacrifice. Bradley always gave them the same answer. "You have to be willing to work harder than everybody else." It sounded good. It was also true. What he never told them was what he'd sacrificed. There was an old photograph in the bottom drawer of his desk. He didn't look at it often. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it showed. Johanna was sitting beside him, laughing at something outside the frame. Bradley was younger, thinner, and still looked like a man who had somewhere else to be, but wasn't in a hurry to get there. They had been married then. 2 years after their divorce, Bradley still hadn't thrown the photograph away. He had told himself there was no reason to. It was just a picture. That was the explanation he used for several things. The photograph, the old messages he hadn't deleted, Johanna's name still sitting in his phone contacts, the occasional instinct to tell her something before remembering that he no longer had the right. Even the guest room at his house remained almost untouched. He had never called it Johanna's room. He simply hadn't changed it. That was how Bradley handled painful things. He didn't destroy them. He put them somewhere he didn't have to see them. His phone buzzed. A calendar reminder appeared for a board meeting at 9. Bradley dismissed it and opened an email. For the next hour, he became the man everyone expected him to be. Focused, decisive, difficult to impress. At 8:45, an executive stepped into the office and began explaining a problem with a major contract. Bradley listened without interrupting. When the man finished, Bradley asked 3 questions. Then he gave an answer. "Fix it before Friday." The executive nodded. "And Bradley?" "Yes. Your father asked to see you after the meeting." Bradley's expression barely changed. "Tell him I'll call him." The executive left. Bradley leaned back in his chair. His father still had a way of appearing in his life without actually being invited into it. Even after everything, Bradley still found himself listening. That bothered him more than he liked to admit. He glanced at the photograph in his desk drawer. For a moment, he thought about Johanna, not the woman from the divorce, not the woman who had packed her things and walked away. He remembered the woman who used to sit barefoot on the kitchen counter while he cooked badly and insisted that he was doing it wrong. He remembered how she used to complain that he checked his phone too often. He remembered promising that things would be different when the company became stable. Then the company became successful, and instead of becoming different, Bradley became busier. The anniversary trip he postponed, the dinners he missed, the weekends he spent answering emails, the appointment Johanna had asked him to attend because she was frightened. He had told her he'd make it up to her. There had always been another weekend, another meeting, another chance, until there wasn't. Bradley closed his eyes for a moment, then his phone vibrated again. He opened his eyes. An incoming message appeared from a number he didn't recognize. There was an attachment, a photograph. Bradley almost deleted it. He was expecting another business document from someone who had the wrong number. Instead, he tapped the image, and everything he thought he understood about the last 7 years was about to change. Bradley stared at the screen for a few seconds before he understood what he was looking at. The first thing he recognized was Johanna. She was standing outside a modest brick building somewhere in Philadelphia, the kind of place Bradley would probably have driven past without noticing. There was a canvas bag hanging from her shoulder, and she was wearing a dark coat with her hair pulled back loosely. She looked different, not dramatically different, just settled. That was the word that came to him. Johanna looked like someone who had stopped waiting for life to become something else. Bradley zoomed in. Then he saw the child. A little boy stood beside her, slightly behind her shoulder. He appeared to be around 7 years old. He was holding something in one hand while looking away from the camera. Bradley stopped breathing for a moment. He zoomed in again. The image became grainier, but the object in the boy's hand became clearer. It was small, dark, worn around the edges. Bradley's thumb remained pressed against the screen. He knew that object. He had chosen it himself. Years ago, before the birth of his son, Bradley had gone into a small specialty store and spent nearly an hour looking at things he didn't understand. Johanna had laughed when he told her about it. "You don't have to buy him the most expensive thing in the store." "I know." "Then why have you been there for an hour?" "Because I don't know what I'm doing." She had smiled. "You'll figure it out." The keepsake hadn't been expensive. That was why Bradley remembered it so clearly. He had wanted his son to have something that wasn't connected to money, family expectations, or the business. Something simple, something that belonged only to them. After the birth, Bradley had placed it with the baby before the nurses took him away. And then Bradley had been told his son was dead. His eyes moved back to the photograph. The boy was holding that same keepsake. "No." Bradley said it quietly, almost as though somebody else was in the room. He enlarged the child's face. The photograph wasn't clear enough to prove anything. But there was something about the boy's eyes, something around the shape of his mouth. Bradley felt an old memory rise unexpectedly. The tiny fingers of a newborn wrapped around his own. He pushed the memory away. He had done that for years. He looked at the sender information. No name, no explanation, just a phone number he didn't recognize. Bradley immediately opened another screen and searched the number. Nothing. He looked at the photograph again. Johanna had never contacted him like this. Not in 2 years, not once. He picked up his office phone. Cancel the 9 o'clock meeting. His assistant hesitated. Mr. Mercer, your board members are all ready. Cancel it. Is everything okay? Bradley looked at the photograph. No. He ended the call. Then he opened the old folder containing the records from the hospital. He had not touched them in years. The folder had been stored digitally, buried beneath hundreds of documents he never needed to access again. He opened the original discharge records, then the neonatal notes, then the transfer information. His eyes moved slowly across the screen. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then he saw a date. He frowned. He opened another document. The date was different. Bradley leaned closer. He checked the hospital summary again. There was a discrepancy. Small. The kind of discrepancy he would once have dismissed because he had been told the records were complicated. But now he couldn't dismiss it. He opened another file. A transfer authorization appeared. There was a signature. Bradley stared at it. He didn't recognize the handwriting. Then he noticed the name of the private medical liaison involved. His father's family office had paid the service. Bradley sat back. His first instinct was immediate. Call his father. He picked up his phone. His father's name appeared near the top of his contacts. Bradley stared at it. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he remembered Johanna sitting across from him years earlier, asking him to look at the records again. He remembered how tired she had looked, how frightened, and how quickly he had told her that she needed to accept what had happened. Bradley lowered the phone. For the first time, he wondered whether Johanna had been asking the right questions all along. He returned to the photograph. The boy was still there, holding the little keepsake. Bradley swallowed hard. There was only one person who could tell him why Johanna had that photograph. His finger moved to another name. Johanna. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Bradley almost expected it to go unanswered. Then, on the 6th ring, she picked up. Hello? Her voice was quieter than he remembered. Bradley couldn't speak immediately. He looked at the photograph again. Then he asked the question that had been sitting inside his chest since the moment he opened it. Johanna, who is that boy? There was silence. Not confusion, not surprise. Silence. And somehow that frightened Bradley more than any answer could have. For several seconds, Bradley could hear nothing but the faint sound of Johanna breathing on the other end of the phone. He didn't repeat the question. He was afraid that if he said it again, whatever answer she had been holding back would become real. Finally, Johanna spoke. Where did you get that picture? Bradley stood from his chair. That's not what I asked. I know. Johanna. Her silence returned. Bradley walked toward the windows. Phone pressed against his ear. I received it from an unknown number. There's no message. Nothing. Just the photograph. Another pause. Did you send it? No. Do you know who did? I have an idea. Bradley's grip tightened around the phone. Who? Johanna exhaled slowly. I can't explain this over the phone. You've had 2 years to explain plenty of things. I know. That answer stopped him. There was no anger in her voice, no attempt to defend herself. just exhaustion. Bradley looked down at the city. "Is he yours?" Johanna didn't answer. Bradley closed his eyes. "Johanna, is that your son?" Still nothing. His voice dropped. "Is he mine?" This time, Johanna inhaled sharply. It was the smallest reaction, but Bradley heard it. His heart began pounding. "Where are you?" he asked. "Bradley, where are you?" "I'll tell you where to meet me." He waited. "Come alone." Bradley opened his eyes. "What?" "Come alone." "Johanna, I'm not playing games." "I'm not playing a game." "Then tell me what is happening." "I can't." "You can't or you won't." "I can't." There was something in her voice that made him stop arguing. She wasn't afraid of him. Bradley knew that. He had known Johanna for too many years not to recognize the difference between fear and caution. She sounded cautious. Very cautious. "Where?" he asked. She gave him an address in a Philadelphia neighborhood he knew but rarely visited. Bradley immediately reached for a pen. "Today?" "Yes." "When?" 11. He glanced at the clock. Less than 2 hours. "Who's going to be there?" "You and me." "And the boy?" Johanna hesitated. "Maybe." That single word hit him harder than anything else she had said. "Johanna, I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening." "Don't bring your lawyers." Bradley frowned. "Why would I bring lawyers?" "Because you're Bradley." He almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the conversation. "What does that mean?" "It means when something scares you, you try to control it." Bradley looked at the hospital records still open on his computer. She knew him too well. "I can handle this." "I'm not asking whether you can handle it." "Then what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to come as yourself." He didn't respond. Johanna continued. "No assistance, no security team. Don't tell your father." Bradley's expression changed. "Why did you mention my father?" "Because you know why." "No, I don't." "You will." Bradley felt a coldness settle over him. "Johanna, what happened to our son?" She was silent again. Then she said something that made his chest tighten. "Our son?" Bradley couldn't speak. Johanna's voice softened. "That's what you called him when you thought nobody was listening." He sat down slowly. For 7 years, he had told himself he had accepted his son's death. He had believed that grief had simply become another room inside him that he never entered. Now, suddenly, that door was open. "Is he alive?" Bradley whispered. Johanna didn't answer. "Please." It was the first time Bradley had ever said that word to her, in that way. Johanna was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, "Come at 11. The call ended. Bradley remained seated. He stared at the phone, then at the photograph, then at the hospital records. His office suddenly felt too large. He looked through the glass wall at the employees outside. People were walking quickly from one meeting to another. Phones were ringing, someone was laughing near the reception desk. The company was continuing as though nothing had happened. But Bradley's world had shifted. He called his assistant. "I need the rest of my meetings cleared." "All of them?" "All of them." "Should I tell the board you're unavailable?" "Tell them I'm unavailable." There was a pause. "Do you need me to come with you?" "No, Mr. Mercer." I said no. He ended the call. Then he looked at his father's contact again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He didn't call. He deleted the number from his recent calls and placed the phone face down. He wasn't ready to hear his father's voice. Not yet. At 10:15, Bradley left the building alone. No driver, no assistant, no security detail, just him. The same man who had spent years believing that every problem could be solved if he had enough information, enough money, and enough authority. But as he drove through Philadelphia toward the address Johanna had given him, Bradley understood something he had spent most of his life avoiding. He didn't have enough information. He didn't know who had sent the photograph. He didn't know whether the boy was his son. He didn't know what Johanna had discovered. And, perhaps most frightening of all, he no longer knew whether the story he had been telling himself for 7 years was true. He stopped at a red light. His eyes returned to the photograph on his phone. The boy was holding the little keepsake Bradley had placed beside his newborn son. Bradley stared at the child's face. Then he whispered to himself, "Please don't let me be wrong." The light turned green. He drove on, and for the first time in years, Bradley wasn't heading toward a boardroom, a negotiation, or a problem he knew how to solve. He was heading toward Johanna, toward the child in the photograph, and toward a truth that might destroy the life he had rebuilt, or give him a chance to finally understand what he had lost. Bradley arrived at the address 3 minutes before 11. It was a narrow brick building on a quiet Philadelphia street, surrounded by older row houses and a few small trees that had begun to lose their leaves. Nothing about the place suggested money, secrecy, or the kind of family problem that could bring a billionaire driving across the city by himself. Bradley parked at the curb. For several seconds, he didn't get out. He looked at the building, then at the photograph on his phone. Johanna had told him to come alone. He had. That alone felt strangely significant. He stepped onto the sidewalk and walked toward the entrance. The door opened before he could knock. Johanna stood there. Bradley hadn't seen her in person in almost a year. He had expected anger. Instead, what struck him was how calm she looked. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, with her hair pulled back. There were no signs that she had spent the morning preparing for some dramatic confrontation. She simply looked tired. "Come in," she said. Bradley stepped inside. He immediately looked around. The building was modest and warm. There was a small table near the wall, with children's drawings scattered across it. A pair of sneakers sat beside the radiator. Bradley noticed them. His eyes stopped. Johanna noticed him noticing. "He's here," she said. Bradley's throat tightened. "Where?" "Upstairs." He looked toward the staircase. Johanna stepped slightly in front of him. "Not yet." Bradley stared at her. "You said there was a child." "There is." "Then why can't I see him?" "Because you don't know what you're looking at yet." Bradley almost lost his patience. "I've spent the last 2 hours wondering whether the child I buried is alive. And I've spent months trying to make sure he doesn't become caught in something he doesn't understand." The words settled between them. Bradley looked away. Johanna walked toward the kitchen. "Sit down." He followed her. She poured water into 2 glasses, but didn't drink hers. Bradley remained standing. "Tell me everything." Johanna looked at him for a long moment. "You remember what happened at the hospital?" "I remember being told our son died." "You remember what happened afterward?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "I remember you questioning everything." "I wasn't questioning everything. You thought the hospital lied." "I thought something was wrong." Bradley didn't answer. Johanna reached for a folder sitting on the table. "I started looking again, about 6 months after our divorce." Bradley frowned. "Why?" "Because I couldn't let it go." She opened the folder. "The first thing I found was a timestamp that didn't make sense. The neonatal record said one thing. The transfer documentation showed another." She placed 2 pages in front of him. Bradley read them. His expression changed. "I thought these were corrected records." "So did I." She turned another page. "Then I found missing portions of the neonatal file." Bradley looked up. "Missing? Not marked as missing, just absent," she continued. "There were signatures I couldn't verify. A private medical service was involved in the transfer, and payments were made through an account connected to your family's office." Bradley stared at the documents. "My father?" I didn't say that. But his office. Yes. Bradley sat down. For years, he had remembered Johanna's questions as the desperate thoughts of a grieving mother who couldn't accept what had happened. Now, he was looking at paperwork that made her questions seem reasonable. Why didn't you tell me? Johanna's expression hardened. I tried. You could have called me. I did. You didn't tell me any of this. I told you something was wrong. Bradley looked down. I thought you were grieving. I was grieving. Her voice cracked slightly, but I was also paying attention. Bradley swallowed. Johanna closed the folder. I eventually found evidence that the baby had been transferred alive. The room seemed to become completely still. Bradley looked at her. What? Alive? He stared at her face, searching for some indication that she was mistaken. Then where was he? I didn't know. Johanna, I didn't know where he went. Bradley stood abruptly. You knew he was alive and you didn't tell me? I didn't know who had him. That doesn't answer my question. I know. 7 years, Johanna. I know. You let me believe my son was dead. I believed you would tell your father. Bradley froze. She looked directly at him. I didn't know if you would believe me then, and I didn't know who you would tell. His face tightened. You should have trusted me. Johanna's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. You should have trusted me. Bradley said nothing. She lowered her voice. You trusted your father when you should have trusted me. And for the first time since receiving the photograph, Bradley had no argument. Because somewhere inside him, he knew she was right. Bradley remained seated for several seconds after Johanna finished speaking. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong about him, that if she had come to him with evidence, he would have listened. But the words wouldn't come, because he remembered the hospital. He remembered Johanna asking questions while he was still trying to arrange a funeral. He remembered telling her, "We have to accept what the doctors are saying." At the time, Bradley had believed he was helping her. Now he wasn't sure whether he had been helping her or simply asking her to stop making him uncomfortable. Johanna picked up the folder. There's something else you need to understand. Bradley looked at her. I don't want you meeting him yet. His body went still. Why? Because he doesn't know who you are. Bradley stared at her. Where is he? Upstairs. He looked toward the ceiling. For 7 years, he had imagined his son as a memory. A newborn face he could barely remember clearly. A hospital room. A tiny blanket. A name he had stopped saying aloud because it hurt too much. Now the child was only a few feet away. Alive. Bradley stood. Johanna didn't stop him this time. She simply said, "Be careful." He nodded. She led him upstairs. The hallway was narrow, with framed drawings hanging along one wall. Most were clearly children's artwork houses, cars, people with oversized heads. At the end of the hall, Johanna stopped. Bradley could hear a pencil moving across paper. She opened the door slightly. A boy sat at a small table near the window. He was drawing. Bradley couldn't see the picture clearly. The boy had dark hair, slightly messy, and wore an old grey sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up. He looked completely ordinary. That somehow made it harder. Bradley had expected some overwhelming moment. Music in his head, a rush of certainty, something that would tell him immediately that this was his son. Instead, he simply stood there, watching a 7-year-old boy draw. The boy looked up. His eyes moved from Johanna to Bradley. "Who's that?" Bradley's chest tightened. Johanna answered calmly. "His name is Bradley." The boy looked at him again. "Is he your friend?" Bradley almost smiled. "I used to be." Johanna gave him a quick look. The boy returned to his drawing. Bradley stepped into the room. "What are you drawing?" The boy turned the paper around. It was a truck. not a normal truck. It had 6 wheels, a strange arm attached to the back, and what looked like a tiny cabin on top. Bradley leaned closer. What's that part? A machine that picks up broken cars. Bradley nodded. That's pretty smart. My teacher said I put too many wheels on things. Maybe your teacher hasn't seen enough trucks. The boy smiled. It was small, but Bradley noticed it. What do you like about trucks? Bradley asked. They can carry heavy things. Bradley looked at the drawing. That's true. The boy reached for another pencil. You work with trucks? Bradley hesitated. A little. Johanna stood near the doorway. Bradley could feel her watching him. The boy looked at him again. Are you rich? Bradley nearly laughed. Johanna covered a smile. Why would you ask that? The boy shrugged. Mum said rich people usually have people who carry their bags. Bradley glanced at Johanna. She's right. Do you have people who carry your bags? Sometimes. Do they get paid? Yes. The boy nodded thoughtfully. Good. Bradley smiled. What? My mum says people should get paid when they work. Bradley looked at Johanna. She raised an eyebrow. I didn't teach him everything, she said. The boy went back to drawing. Bradley watched him. There was something familiar about the way the boy became completely absorbed in whatever he was doing. He had seen that concentration before. In himself, in Johanna. Maybe he was imagining it. He didn't trust his own mind anymore. Then the boy reached into a small container beside him and pulled out a handful of peas from his lunch plate. He frowned. I don't like these, Johanna sighed. You've already picked them out 3 times. They taste weird. Bradley smiled, despite himself. I didn't like peas either. The boy looked at him. Really? Really? Did you eat them? Sometimes. Why? Bradley thought about it. Because somebody told me I had to. The boy considered that answer. Then he pushed the peas farther away. I don't think I'll do that. Bradley laughed softly. For a moment, he forgot everything. Then a chair scraped against the floor downstairs. The sound startled the boy. His pencil stopped. His shoulders tightened. He became very quiet. Bradley noticed immediately. The boy looked toward the door. Johanna's expression changed. She had noticed too. Bradley remembered what Johanna had told him about the boy becoming quiet when adults raised their voices. He suddenly understood that Micah had learned something many children learned too early. Adults could change the atmosphere of a room without warning. Bradley lowered his voice. Hey! Micah looked at him. You don't have to worry. Nobody's angry. The boy nodded. Bradley realized how badly he wanted to tell him the truth. I'm your father. The words were right there, but he swallowed them. Not yet. For once, Bradley understood that wanting something, desperately, didn't mean he had the right to take it. He looked at Johanna. She gave him the smallest nod, and Bradley stayed where he was. Not as a billionaire, not as an employer, not even yet as a father. Just as a man sitting beside a little boy, trying very hard not to ruin the first fragile moment of something he had waited 7 years to find. Bradley waited until Micah was downstairs with a book before he said anything to Johanna. The boy had wandered into the living room after finishing his drawing, apparently more interested in finding out whether a 7-year-old could build a machine from cardboard than in the adult's conversation. Johanna watched him settle onto the couch. Then she closed the door between the living room and the hallway. Bradley turned toward her. You kept my son from me. Johanna didn't flinch. I kept a child away from a situation I didn't believe was safe. He's my son. I know. You knew. I knew he was alive. That's the same thing. No, Bradley, it isn't. His voice rose. You don't get to decide that. And you don't get to walk in here after 7 years and decide everything because you're his biological father. Bradley stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, quieter, "Do you know what those 7 years were like?" Johanna's expression changed. "Do you?" "I buried him. So did I. I lost my child. So did I." "No, Johanna, you found him." She stared at him. Eventually, Bradley looked away. The anger inside him was beginning to mix with something else. Pain. He hated that. Anger was easier. He could do something with anger. Pain simply sat there. "You should have told me." "I know." "You should have called me the moment you found out." "I know." "Then why didn't you?" Johanna folded her arms. "Because I didn't trust you." The answer was so direct that Bradley almost stepped back. "You didn't trust me?" "No. After everything we went through." "Because of everything we went through." Bradley shook his head. "I would have helped you." Johanna looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "Would you?" "Yes." Or, "Would you have called your father?" Bradley opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Johanna saw the answer before he gave it. "You see?" Bradley looked toward the floor. "That was years ago. It was the most important time of my life. I was grieving too." "I know. I didn't know what to do." "Neither did I." "Then why did you treat me like I was your enemy?" "Because every time I told you something felt wrong, you told me I was imagining it." Bradley rubbed his forehead. "I thought you couldn't accept that he was gone." "I couldn't." Her voice softened, but that didn't mean I was wrong. Bradley looked at her. Johanna's eyes were wet now, but she refused to wipe them. "I needed you to sit beside me and say, 'Let's find out.' Instead, you told me what I needed to believe." Bradley swallowed. "I thought I was protecting you." "You were protecting yourself." That sentence landed harder than the others. Bradley turned away. Through the doorway, he could see Micah reading. The boy looked peaceful, completely unaware that two adults were standing only a few feet away, trying to understand 7 years of pain. Bradley lowered his voice. "Why didn't you tell me after the divorce?" Johanna took a breath. "Because by then, I had learned something." "What?" "That I couldn't make decisions based on what I hoped you would do." Bradley looked at her. "I had to think about Micah first." "So you decided I was dangerous?" "I decided your family was dangerous." "My father." "Your father had influence over you." Bradley flinched. "That's not fair." "It wasn't fair that I had to wonder whether telling you would put him in control again." Bradley had no immediate response. Johanna walked to the window. "I spent years believing that if I could just explain myself clearly enough, you'd finally understand." She looked outside. "Then I realized I was exhausting myself trying to convince someone who had already made his choice." Bradley knew she wasn't talking only about Micah. She was talking about their marriage. The meetings, the missed dinners, the excuses, the way she had slowly stopped asking him to come home because she already knew what he would say. He sat down. His anger had almost disappeared. "What do you want from me?" Johanna looked at him. "The truth. That's it, for now. No money? No. A lawyer? No. You don't want me to take him." Johanna's expression hardened. "He's not something you take." Bradley nodded slowly. "I know. Do you?" He looked toward Micah. After a moment he said, "I'm trying to." That answer seemed to affect her more than an argument would have. Bradley took a breath. "I want to know what happened." "You do." "I want to know who knew." "You will." "And I want to know whether my father was involved." Johanna didn't answer. She didn't have to. Bradley understood. He stood. "I'll find out." Johanna looked at him carefully. "Don't turn this into another business problem." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you can't throw money at this until everyone tells you what you want to hear." Bradley almost objected. Then he remembered the photograph, the hospital records. The missing information. Micah upstairs. He nodded. Okay. Johanna seemed surprised. Bradley looked toward the living room. Micah was still reading. Then Bradley turned back to her. I don't know what happens after we find the truth. Neither do I. But I'm going to find it. Johanna nodded. And for the first time since he had walked through her door, neither of them was trying to win the argument. They were standing on opposite sides of the same wound, and Bradley was finally beginning to understand that before he could ask Johanna for forgiveness, before he could ask Micah to call him anything at all, he had to find out exactly what had happened to the family he had once believed he had lost forever. By the time Bradley left Johanna's house that afternoon, he had already decided what he was going to do. He was going to find out what happened. His first instinct was the same instinct that had carried him through almost every serious problem in his adult life. He would hire people who knew how to find things. People with access. People who could dig through records, trace payments, interview witnesses, and make difficult questions impossible to ignore. By the time he reached his office, he had already sent one message to his executive assistant, asking for the name of the firm's most discreet investigative team. Then he called Johanna. She answered almost immediately. I'm going to investigate. I figured you would. I'm serious. So am I. I'll have people looking into the hospital records, the medical service, the transfers. Bradley, stop. He went quiet. What? Don't send anyone yet. He frowned. Why? Because the moment people realize you're investigating, they'll know exactly why. I can keep it private. No, you can't. I've kept bigger things private. This isn't a corporate acquisition. Her voice wasn't angry. That made it harder to dismiss. People who stayed silent for 7 years aren't going to suddenly become honest because you hired expensive investigators. Bradley leaned back in his chair. What do you want me to do? Start with the people who were actually there. You mean witnesses. I mean people. That distinction stayed with him. The following morning, Bradley began making calls himself. The first person he contacted was Dr. Miriam Bellamy, a retired neonatal physician whose name appeared repeatedly in the old records. She agreed to meet him at a small coffee shop in Center City. Bradley arrived early. Dr. Bellamy was already sitting in the corner with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair and the calm expression of someone who had spent decades learning not to react before understanding what she was hearing. She looked at Bradley when he approached. I know who you are. Bradley sat across from her. I assume that's why you agreed to meet. No. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I agreed, because Johanna called me. Bradley paused. She spoke to you. Several months ago. What did she ask? Dr. Bellamy looked toward the window. Questions about your son. Bradley's jaw tightened. And what did you tell her? That I remembered the case. Do you remember what happened? I remember enough to know that some parts of the record don't make sense. Bradley leaned forward. Why didn't you say that before? Dr. Bellamy looked directly at him. Because at the time, everyone around that case seemed certain about what they wanted the record to say. Bradley felt a chill. Are you saying someone changed it? No. She paused. I'm saying I don't know. That answer frustrated him, but he forced himself not to interrupt. For years, he would have demanded certainty. Now he was beginning to understand that uncertainty was sometimes the most honest answer a person could give. Dr. Bellamy reached into her handbag and removed a small notebook. I wrote down what I remembered after Johanna contacted me. She slid it across the table. Bradley looked at the page. There were dates, times, names of departments. One notation was circled. Transfer authorization. Who handled that? Bradley asked. I wasn't responsible for the transfer. Who was? Dr. Bellamy hesitated. Calvin Rourke. Bradley wrote the name down. He was a medical services administrator. If anyone can explain the paperwork, it would be him. What happened to him? He left the service years ago. Do you know where he is? Dr. Bellamy nodded. I believe Johanna found him. Bradley looked up. She did. For the first time, Dr. Bellamy's expression softened. Then you should listen to her. Bradley closed the notebook. Before leaving, he asked one final question. Doctor, did my son die that night? Dr. Bellamy didn't answer immediately. Then she said quietly, I never personally saw a death record that satisfied me. Bradley stared at her. She gathered her things. And that's all I can tell you. It wasn't enough, but it was more than he had known yesterday. That afternoon, Bradley met Calvin Rourke. The former administrator was reluctant to speak at first. He kept looking at Bradley as though deciding whether the meeting was worth the risk. When Bradley asked about the transfer, Calvin's face changed. I knew this day would come. Bradley sat forward. What day? The day somebody finally asked the right questions. Before Calvin could explain further, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression tightened. I have to go. Wait! Calvin stood. Mr. Mercer, if you really want the truth, don't start by asking what happened to your son. Bradley stared at him. Then what should I ask? Calvin looked toward the door. Ask who had the authority to make decisions that night. Then he walked away. Bradley remained at the table. For the first time, he understood that finding the truth would not be about throwing money at a mystery. It would require patience. And people who remembered, people who were afraid, and people who had spent years hoping nobody would ever ask them what they knew. Bradley didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Calvin Rourke's last sentence. Ask who had the authority to make decisions that night. By 7 the next morning, Bradley was back at his desk. He had barely opened his laptop when Marcus Bell walked in. Marcus had been Bradley's chief operating officer for almost a decade. He was one of the few people in the company who could walk into Bradley's office without an appointment and survive the experience. He stopped when he saw Bradley's desk. There were printed hospital records everywhere. Is that work? No. Marcus looked at him. Then what is it? Bradley gathered the papers into a stack. Something personal. Marcus nodded. He didn't ask. That was one reason Bradley trusted him. But as he turned to leave, Bradley said, I may need you to cover for me. Marcus stopped. How much? I don't know. That's usually when I get worried. Bradley almost smiled. Then his expression returned to seriousness. I need the company to keep moving while I deal with something. Marcus studied him. Is this about Johanna? Bradley looked up sharply. Marcus raised his hands. You don't have to answer. Bradley was quiet. Finally, he said, It's about something that happened before the divorce. Marcus understood that it was bigger than he had expected. I'll handle the schedule. Thank you. After Marcus left, Bradley returned to the records. There was one name he couldn't stop thinking about. His father. He opened the family office records. At first, he found nothing. Then he searched for the private medical service. A payment appeared, then another. The amounts weren't enormous compared with the family's normal expenses, which was probably why Bradley had never noticed them. But the dates mattered. One payment had been made shortly after the baby's birth. Another followed the transfer. Bradley stared at the screen. He called the family office. Is my father in? The assistant hesitated. He's at the house. Put me through. A few seconds later, his father's voice came through. You've been avoiding me. Bradley ignored that. Did you know the baby survived? Silence. It wasn't long, but Bradley heard it. His father finally said, Where did you hear that? Bradley's stomach tightened. That's not an answer. Bradley, did you know? His father's voice became colder. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it. Come to the house. No. Bradley, I want an answer. Another silence. Then his father said something that made Bradley's blood run cold. I did what I believed was necessary. Bradley stood. Necessary for what? For you. Bradley laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You knew. I knew there was a possibility the child had survived. A possibility? Come here. Bradley ended the call. He drove to his father's house without telling anyone. The estate was outside the city, behind tall iron gates and a long private drive Bradley had known since childhood. His father was waiting in the study. He looked older than Bradley remembered, but not weaker. His father had always been a man who believed age was something other people had to worry about. Bradley didn't sit. Tell me what happened. His father looked at him. You're emotional. I'm supposed to be. You need to think carefully. I've been thinking for 7 years. His father sighed. The baby was transferred because there were concerns about security. What security? The family's profile. Bradley stared at him. You separated my newborn son from his mother because you were worried about the family profile. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple. There were threats. To a newborn, to the family. Bradley shook his head. You had no right. I was protecting you. No. His father looked irritated. You were destroying yourself. Your wife was unstable with grief. I did what you couldn't. Bradley went completely still. My wife was grieving. She was becoming obsessed. She was asking questions. Questions that could have caused problems. For whom? His father didn't answer. Bradley understood. You knew he was alive. I knew he had been transferred. And you told me he died. I allowed you to believe what the doctors had already told you. Bradley's face hardened. You allowed it. His father looked away. I thought you needed to move forward. Bradley stared at him. There it was. Not an apology, not regret, just certainty. His father genuinely believed he had been protecting his son, and somehow that made the betrayal worse. You made a decision about my child, Bradley said quietly, because you thought you knew what was best for me. I was trying to save you. You didn't save me. Bradley's voice broke. You took away the chance for me to be his father. His father remained silent. Bradley turned toward the door. Behind him, his father said, Everything I did was for this family. Bradley stopped. Then he looked back. No. His voice was quiet. You did it because you believed this family belonged to you. He walked out. For the first time in his life, Bradley understood that his father's greatest flaw wasn't cruelty, it was certainty. He had spent decades believing that power gave him the right to make decisions for everyone else. And Bradley had spent years mistaking that certainty for wisdom, until now. Bradley didn't call Johanna immediately after leaving his father's house. He drove for nearly 40 minutes without deciding where he was going. At one point, he realized he had passed the same intersection twice. His phone kept vibrating in the cup holder. Work. 3 missed calls from Marcus. A message from his assistant about a meeting he was supposed to attend. Another message from a board member asking whether he would be available that afternoon. Bradley turned the phone face down. For once, none of it felt important. He eventually pulled into a small parking lot near the Schuylkill River and shut off the engine. The car became quiet. His father's words kept returning. I did what you couldn't. Bradley closed his eyes. He wanted to blame his father. It would have been easy. His father had made the decision. His father had used his influence. His father had allowed Bradley and Johanna to believe their son was dead. But as Bradley sat there, another memory surfaced. Johanna, standing in the hospital hallway, Her hair was pulled back messily, and she was still wearing the clothes she had worn during the delivery. She had looked exhausted, frightened, and desperate for someone to tell her that she wasn't imagining things. Bradley remembered her saying, "Something doesn't make sense," and he remembered what he'd said. The doctors know what they're doing. At the time, he had thought he was being reasonable. Now the sentence sounded cruel. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Johanna. He answered, "Hello, you went to see him." It wasn't a question. Bradley looked out through the windshield. "How did you know?" "Because I know you." He almost laughed. "I found the connection." "Between your father and the medical service?" "Yes." Johanna was quiet. Then she asked, "What did he say?" Bradley told her. "Not every word, not yet, but enough." When he finished, Johanna didn't sound surprised. "That's what I was afraid of." Bradley gripped the steering wheel. "He says he was protecting me." "I know. He genuinely believes that." "I know." Bradley swallowed. "I want to blame him for everything." "You can blame him for what he did. And the rest?" Johanna didn't answer. Bradley already knew what she meant. The silence stretched between them. Finally, he said, "I should have listened to you." Johanna breathed out slowly. Yes. There was no comfort in the answer, no attempt to make him feel better, just the truth. Bradley looked down. "I thought you were falling apart." "I was. I thought your grief was making you see things that weren't there." "I was grieving, Bradley." "That doesn't make me stupid. I know that now. You should have known then." He closed his eyes. "I know." Johanna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father made the decision, but you made it easier for him because you stopped listening." Bradley felt something inside him give way. Not dramatically. There was no sudden revelation, just the slow realization that the story he had told himself for 7 years had always been incomplete. He had said his father had deceived him. That was true. He had said Johanna had walked away from their marriage. That was also true. But he had never asked himself why she had reached the point where leaving seemed easier than staying. Bradley remembered the weeks after their son's death. He had gone back to work. He told himself he had responsibilities. The company was expanding. There were investors waiting. Employees needed decisions. He had spent long nights in his office because being busy meant he didn't have to sit in a quiet house and hear Johanna crying. He had mistaken avoidance for strength. Johanna had needed him. Instead, Bradley had given her schedules, meetings, appointments, money, anything except himself. He rubbed his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix all of it." Her voice was softer now. "You can only stop making it worse." Bradley nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "What do you need me to do?" "Find out the truth." "I'm going to." "Even if it hurts your family?" Bradley looked through the windshield. The Philadelphia skyline stood in the distance. For most of his adult life, those buildings had represented everything he had worked for: growth, power, security, success. Now they looked different. He thought about the company. If the investigation exposed his father's actions, there could be lawsuits, public scrutiny, questions from investors, damage to the family name, maybe even consequences for people who had spent years protecting the secret. And for the first time, Bradley realized he wasn't willing to protect the company at the expense of the truth. "Even if it hurts everything," he said. Johanna didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "That's not what I expected you to say." "Neither did I." After the call ended, Bradley sat in the car for another few minutes. Then he started the engine. He drove back to the office. Marcus was waiting outside his office. "You missed the board meeting." "I know, 3 people called me, asking whether you're all right." I'm fine. Marcus gave him a skeptical look. No, you're not. Bradley walked past him, then stopped. Marcus. Yes? I need you to take over the next 2 weeks of operational meetings. Marcus stared at him. 2 weeks? Maybe longer. What's happening? Bradley looked at the city beyond the glass windows. I'm dealing with something I should have dealt with a long time ago. Marcus studied him. Then he nodded. All right. Bradley sat at his desk. He looked at the contracts waiting for his signature. For years, he had believed the hardest thing in life was building something enormous and keeping it from falling apart. Now he understood that sometimes the harder thing was admitting that the thing you built had been costing you pieces of yourself all along. He opened a new file. At the top, he typed one sentence, "Find out what happened to my son." Then he added another, "No matter who gets hurt by the truth." He stared at the words. This time, he didn't delete them, because Bradley finally understood that he wasn't simply searching for Micah. He was searching for the part of himself he had abandoned every time he chose work, reputation, or family approval over the people who had needed him. And if finding the truth meant confronting his father, risking his company, and admitting his own failures to Johanna, then that was what he would do. For once, Bradley wasn't choosing tomorrow. He was choosing what mattered now. The first time Bradley spent an entire afternoon with Micah, he brought nothing with him. No driver, no assistant, no expensive package wrapped in tissue paper. Just himself. Johanna had agreed to let them spend a few hours together at a small community park near her neighborhood. She would remain nearby, but she promised not to sit between them unless Micah needed her. Bradley arrived early and sat on a bench. When Johanna and Micah appeared, the boy was carrying a sketchbook under one arm. Bradley stood. "Hi." Micah looked at him. "Hi." There was still a carefulness between them. Bradley understood why. He was a stranger who knew things about Micah that Micah didn't know about himself. That was a strange position for both of them. Bradley pointed toward the sketchbook. "More machines?" Micah nodded. "Can I see?" Micah hesitated, then handed it over. The pages were filled with drawings, trucks, cranes, small mechanical arms. One drawing showed a machine that could collect fallen branches and turn them into furniture. Bradley studied it seriously. This one might actually work. Micah smiled. "My teacher says I'm always thinking about machines." "That's not a bad thing. Do you think so?" "I think people who understand how things work can build better things." Micah looked at him. "Do you build things?" Bradley thought about his company. "Yes. Big things. Sometimes." Micah nodded as though that answered everything. They walked toward a table where Bradley had placed a small mechanical model. It wasn't expensive. Bradley had deliberately chosen something that required patience rather than batteries. Micah opened the box. "You brought this?" "Yes. Why?" "I thought we could build it." Micah looked at the pieces. "Do you know how?" Bradley smiled. "No." Micah laughed. Bradley laughed too. "Good," Micah said. "Then we can figure it out." They sat together. For the next hour, Bradley forgot about hospital records, lawyers, his father, and everything waiting for him at the office. The model had dozens of small pieces. Bradley kept trying to force 2 parts together. Micah stopped him. "You're doing it wrong." Bradley looked at him. "Am I?" "Yeah." "How do you know?" "Because the picture says so." Bradley looked at the instructions. Micah was right. Bradley leaned back. "All right, you're in charge." Micah grinned. The little machine slowly came together. At one point, Micah asked, "Were you good at school?" Bradley considered lying. "No?" Micah looked surprised. "Really? I was good at some things, Like what? Numbers. Did you like math? Not when I was your age. Micah smiled. My teacher gives us too much homework. I remember that. Do you have homework? Not anymore. You're lucky. Bradley laughed. Very. Later, they walked toward the playground. Micah climbed onto a bicycle someone had left near the fence. He tried to ride it. Bradley instinctively reached out. I've got you. Micah frowned. I can do it. Bradley stopped. Okay. Micah pushed off. He made it several feet before losing his balance. Bradley caught him just before he fell. Micah looked embarrassed. I'm okay. I know. Bradley didn't tell him to be careful. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He simply helped him straighten the bicycle. Micah tried again. This time, he made it farther. Bradley watched him ride across the pavement. Something painful moved through his chest. He thought about all the ordinary things he had missed. The first bicycle ride, the first day of school, the lost teeth, the nightmares, birthday cakes, small arguments over vegetables, questions about homework, the countless moments that never appeared in photographs because nobody thought they were important enough to document. Those were the years Bradley couldn't buy back. He could purchase a building, he could acquire a company, he could replace a damaged car before the owner even knew it had been scratched. But there was no account large enough to purchase 7 years of bedtime stories. Micah rode back toward him. Did you see? Bradley smiled. I saw. I didn't fall. No, you didn't. Micah looked proud. Bradley crouched beside him. You did that yourself. Micah nodded. Then, after a moment, he asked, Are you coming back next week? Bradley felt his throat tighten. He looked at the boy. I'd like to. Micah nodded, as though that was enough. Bradley stood. And as they walked back toward Johanna, he realized something that frightened him more than any business failure ever had. Micah wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for a bigger house. He wasn't asking for anything Bradley knew how to provide. He was asking whether Bradley would come back. For the first time, Bradley understood that fatherhood wasn't going to be about giving Micah everything. It was going to be about being there when something ordinary happened, and staying long enough for the boy to believe he would still be there tomorrow. A few weeks passed before Bradley realized something had changed. Not between him and Micah. That part was still new and fragile. It was something quieter. He had stopped checking his phone whenever he was with them. The first time Johanna noticed, they were sitting at her kitchen table while Micah worked on a school project in the next room. Bradley had placed his phone face down beside his coffee. Johanna looked at it. You can answer it. Bradley shook his head. No. It might be important. He looked toward the doorway. If it can wait until I leave, it'll wait. Johanna studied him for a moment. That's new. Bradley smiled faintly. Apparently I can learn. She didn't smile back immediately. Instead, she looked down at her coffee. I've noticed. Bradley understood there was something behind the words. He waited. Johanna finally said, You're getting comfortable. He frowned. With Micah? With all of this? Bradley didn't answer. Johanna continued. I don't want you misunderstanding what's happening. His expression changed. I don't think I am. Do you? She looked directly at him. Bradley, finding Micah doesn't mean we're going back to being married. The sentence was quiet, almost gentle, but it still hurt. Bradley looked away. He had known that, at least intellectually. But knowing something and hearing it from the person you still cared about were two different things. I wasn't asking you to. You were thinking about it. Bradley smiled sadly. Maybe. Johanna sighed. I need you to understand something. I'm listening. I care about what happens to you. Bradley looked at her. I care about what happens to Micah, and I don't regret letting you into his life." He waited. "But I'm not the woman who left your house 2 years ago." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Johanna folded her hands. "I built a life without you. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I wanted to call you. There were days when I missed the person you used to be. But eventually, I stopped waiting for you to become someone you weren't." Bradley swallowed. "I was wrong." "You were." He nodded. "I know." She seemed almost surprised by how easily he accepted it. Bradley looked down at his hands. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't want another chance." Johanna's eyes softened. "But I don't want to pressure you." "Good. I don't want to convince you." "Good. I don't want you to come back because you feel guilty." Johanna shook her head. "Good." Bradley looked at her. "Then what can I do?" "Nothing." He frowned. "What?" "Nothing to make me come back." The answer was difficult for him. His entire adult life had been built around solving problems. But Johanna wasn't giving him a problem. She was giving him a boundary. "You can't earn your way back into a marriage like you're earning a promotion," she said. Bradley let out a quiet breath. "I understand. I hope you do." The conversation ended there. No dramatic reconciliation, no promise, no kiss. Bradley simply picked up his coat and left. Outside, he stood beside his car for a moment. The old Bradley would have tried to change her mind. He would have asked what he needed to do. He would have offered solutions, maybe a house, a trip, therapy, anything that could turn uncertainty into a measurable plan. Instead, he got into the car. He drove home, and he did nothing. The next week, he showed up when he said he would. The week after that, he came to Micah's school project presentation. He sat in the back. Micah spotted him and smiled. Bradley smiled back. He didn't make the moment about himself. He simply stayed. Johanna noticed. She noticed when he listened instead of interrupting. She noticed when he apologized without adding an explanation afterward. She noticed that he no longer sent someone else to deliver something he could deliver himself. And she noticed something else. Bradley had stopped asking when she would forgive him. That mattered. Because forgiveness, Johanna was beginning to understand, was not something Bradley could demand simply because he finally understood what he had done. It had to happen at her pace. One evening, after Bradley had dropped Micah home, Johanna walked him to the door. "You're different." Bradley looked at her. "I'm trying to be." "Why?" He thought about the question. "Because I don't want to lose another 7 years." Johanna's eyes became wet. Bradley continued before she could answer. "Not because I expect anything from you." She nodded slowly. "That's the first thing you've said that makes me believe you might actually understand." Bradley smiled faintly. "That's enough for tonight." He walked toward his car. Johanna remained at the doorway. For years, she had believed Bradley needed to lose everything before he would understand what mattered. She had been wrong about one thing. He didn't need to lose everything. He needed to stop trying to control what happened next, and for the first time, Bradley was beginning to do exactly that. The document arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Bradley was in his office when Marcus walked in, carrying a thin brown envelope. He didn't sit. "Someone left this with the receptionist." Bradley looked up. "Who?" she said. The man wouldn't give his name. Bradley took the envelope. There was no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a transfer authorization form dated 7 years earlier, along with a handwritten note. "You were asking the wrong question. Look at the authorization." Bradley's hands went still. He recognized the signature immediately. His father's. Not a typed name, not a digital authorization. An actual signature. Bradley read the document twice. The newborn had been transferred from the hospital to a private medical facility under an emergency protective authorization. But the authorization did not state that the baby had died. It stated that the infant was alive and stable enough for transfer. Bradley stared at the page. For 7 years, he had believed his son had died shortly after birth. The document said otherwise. Marcus watched him carefully. "Bradley?" "I need some time." Marcus nodded and left. Bradley immediately called Johanna. She arrived less than an hour later. When she saw the document, she didn't look surprised. "I knew there was something like this." "You knew?" "I knew someone had authorized the transfer. I didn't have this copy." Bradley placed another page beside it. "It gets worse." He had spent the morning comparing the original hospital records with the documents Dr. Miriam Bellamy had given him and the information Calvin Rourke had reluctantly provided. The dates finally aligned. The baby had been alive when he left the hospital. The private medical service had been acting under instructions connected to Bradley's family, and the person who had authorized the intervention was Bradley's father. Johanna sat down. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "Now you know." Bradley nodded. "I know enough." "Do you?" He looked at her. "There are still questions." "Then ask them." Bradley picked up his phone. "I'm going back to my father." Johanna looked at him. "Are you sure?" "No." He stood. "But I need to hear him say it." His father was waiting in the same study where they had spoken before. Bradley walked in carrying the document. His father looked at it. Then he looked at Bradley. "You found it." Bradley's chest tightened. "You knew." "I told you there was a transfer." "You knew he survived." His father said nothing. Bradley stepped closer. "Say it." His father lowered his eyes. "Yes?" One word. It was enough to make Bradley feel as though the room had shifted beneath him. "You knew my son was alive?" "Yes." "And you let me believe he was dead." "I believed it was safer." "For whom?" His father didn't answer. Bradley laughed bitterly. "You still can't say it." "I was trying to protect the family." "You keep saying that because it's true." "No." Bradley's voice remained controlled. "You protected an idea of the family." His father looked at him. "I protected you." Bradley shook his head. "You didn't protect me. You made decisions about my life because you thought I couldn't be trusted with it." His father's face hardened. "You were destroying yourself. That wasn't your decision. Someone had to act. My wife was asking questions. She was unstable. She was grieving. She was becoming obsessed. She was the mother of your grandson." The words finally broke through Bradley's control. His father stood. "I did what I believed was necessary." Bradley stared at him. "And that's the problem." His father looked confused. "You never believed you could be wrong." Silence. Bradley continued. "You decided where my son should go. You decided what I should know. You decided what Johanna could handle. You decided when I should move on." His voice dropped. "You even decided what kind of grief I was allowed to have." His father looked away. Bradley expected an apology. It never came. That told him everything. He turned toward the door. "Where is he?" His father didn't answer. Bradley stopped. "I know he's alive. I know you arranged the transfer. I know the records were buried." He looked back. Where was he? His father finally gave him the information he needed. Not enough to erase what had happened. Enough to establish the chain of events. Enough for Bradley to understand that the truth could no longer remain inside the family. He left the house. Outside, the afternoon air was cold. Johanna was waiting in the car. Bradley got inside. She looked at him. Did he admit it? Bradley nodded. Yes. She didn't celebrate. Neither did he. There was nothing to celebrate. A child had lost 7 years with his parents. A mother had spent years questioning her own sanity. A father had built an empire while believing his son was dead. And another father had convinced himself that controlling everyone's lives was an act of love. Bradley looked through the windshield. "I think we have to make this public." Johanna turned toward him. "Are you sure?" "No." He looked at the folder on his lap. "But I'm done deciding that protecting the family name is more important than telling the truth." Johanna nodded slowly. Bradley knew what that decision could cost. His father's reputation, his company's reputation, investors, business partners, maybe even his own position. For once, he wasn't trying to calculate the cost before doing what was right. He simply accepted that consequences existed. He reached for Johanna's hand, then stopped himself. He remembered her boundary. Instead, he placed his hand back on his own knee. Johanna noticed. After a moment, she reached over and rested her hand gently on his. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. For the first time, Bradley understood that some things couldn't be bought, negotiated, or forced. Truth had to be faced. Trust had to be rebuilt, and love, if it ever returned, would have to come freely. Not because Bradley had finally learned how to get what he wanted, but because he had finally learned how to stop taking what wasn't his to control. The truth changed everything. It just didn't fix everything. That was something Bradley learned during the weeks after the investigation ended. There were documents now. There were statements from people who had been afraid to speak. There was enough evidence to establish what had happened to Micah, and enough information for the necessary authorities and attorneys to deal with the consequences. But none of it could give Johanna back the years she had spent believing her son was dead. None of it could erase the nights Bradley had spent grieving a child who was actually alive. And none of it could make Micah suddenly understand why two adults who loved him had spent years living separate lives. For Micah, the biggest change was surprisingly ordinary. He had a father, a biological father who now showed up. Bradley didn't force the word. He didn't ask Micah to call him Dad. He simply kept appearing. School pickup, Saturday afternoons, a doctor's appointment when Johanna needed another adult there. A rainy evening when Micah's science project had fallen apart 10 minutes before bedtime. Bradley learned quickly that 7-year-olds didn't care about billion-dollar companies. They cared whether you remembered which pencil was their favorite, whether you listened to the same story twice, whether you showed up when you said you would. One Tuesday morning, Bradley was sitting in his office, preparing for a negotiation that had taken months to arrange when his phone rang. It was Johanna. He answered immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing serious." Bradley relaxed slightly. "What's happening?" Micah's school moved his presentation to this afternoon. Bradley looked at the schedule on his computer. The negotiation was at 2. The presentation was at 2. For several seconds, he said nothing. Johanna understood. "You don't have to come." Bradley looked through the glass wall of his office. 3 executives were waiting outside. A legal team was already preparing documents. His calendar was packed. The old Bradley would have said, "I'll make it up to him." Instead, he said, "I'll be there." "You have a meeting, I know." "Bradley, I'll be there." He ended the call. 20 minutes later, Marcus walked into his office. "The negotiation team is ready. I won't be there." Marcus stopped. "What?" "I have Micah's school presentation." Marcus stared at him. "The one at 2. "Yes." "Bradley, we've been working on this for months." "I know." "The other side flew in from Chicago." "I know." Marcus looked at him for several seconds. Then he smiled faintly. The old Bradley would never have walked away from a major negotiation for a school event. Bradley picked up his coat. "I know. There was no pride in his voice, no satisfaction, just recognition. He had once considered moments like this evidence that he was disciplined. Now he understood they had often been evidence that he had confused importance with urgency. Marcus nodded. "I'll handle it." Bradley paused at the door. "Thank you." "Go." Bradley left. The school auditorium was small. There were folding chairs, construction paper decorations, and parents trying to keep younger siblings quiet. Bradley sat near the back. When Micah's turn came, he walked to the front holding a poster covered with drawings of machines. He looked nervous. Then he saw Bradley. His shoulders relaxed. He began explaining his invention. It was a machine designed to collect damaged bicycles and repair them. The idea was simple. But Micah spoke about it as though he had solved a national problem. Bradley listened to every word. When the presentation ended, Micah looked toward him. Bradley applauded, not louder than everyone else, just enough for Micah to know he had been watching. Afterward, they walked outside together. "Did you like it?" Micah asked. "I loved it." "You really did?" "Really." Micah smiled. Then he asked, "Was your meeting important?" Bradley looked at him. "Yes." "Did you miss it?" Bradley considered the question. "I missed part of it." "Are you going to get in trouble?" Bradley smiled. "Probably not." Micah kicked a small stone along the sidewalk. "Good." Bradley looked at him. "Why?" "Because I wanted you here." The words were simple. They nearly broke Bradley's heart. He nodded. "I wanted to be here too." That evening, Bradley returned to his office. The negotiation had gone well without him. His company was still standing. The contracts had not disappeared. The world had continued. And Bradley finally understood something he wished he had learned years earlier. Work would always demand another hour, another meeting, another call, another deadline. But children did not wait forever to stop needing you. He closed his laptop. For the first time, leaving the office early did not feel like failure. It felt like arriving somewhere he should have been all along. By the time winter settled over Philadelphia, something between Bradley and Johanna had become easier. Not simple, easier. There was a difference. They could sit at the same table without every silence feeling like an accusation. They could talk about Micah's school without accidentally turning the conversation into an argument about the past. Sometimes they even laughed. The first time it happened, Johanna seemed almost surprised by herself. Micah had spilled an entire glass of orange juice across the kitchen table and immediately blamed the crooked table leg. Bradley looked at the puddle. "The table did it?" Micah nodded seriously. "Definitely." Johanna tried to remain serious. She failed. Bradley laughed. Then Johanna laughed too. For a few seconds, they sounded like the couple they had once been. Then the moment passed. Neither of them tried to hold on to it. That was important, because Bradley had stopped trying to turn every good moment into evidence that Johanna was ready to take him back. He simply appreciated the moment. One evening, after Micah had gone upstairs, Johanna and Bradley sat on the back steps. The neighborhood was quiet. A porch light across the street flickered on. Bradley had a cup of coffee in his hands, although it had gone cold. Johanna noticed. "You don't have to drink that." "I know." "Then why are you holding it?" Bradley looked at the cup. "I don't know." Johanna smiled. Some things don't change. He smiled too. For a while, they sat without speaking. Then Johanna said, "I don't know what we're supposed to be." Bradley looked at her. Neither of them had said it before. Not directly. He could have used the opening to tell her how much he wanted her back. Instead, he said, "Neither do I." Johanna turned toward him. Bradley continued, "Maybe we don't have to decide tonight." She studied his face. "You really mean that?" "Yes." What if I never want to be married to you again? Bradley took a breath. Then I'll have to learn how to accept that. Johanna looked down at her hands. That's not the answer I expected. I know. You used to have an answer for everything. I was usually wrong. She laughed softly. Not everything. Enough. The smile disappeared from her face. I don't want you staying close to me because you feel guilty. I don't. I don't want you being a good father because you're trying to prove something to me. I'm not. And I don't want Micah caught in the middle of whatever we're doing. He won't be. Johanna looked at him. You can't promise that. Bradley nodded. You're right. That answer mattered. He was learning that honesty sometimes meant admitting that he couldn't control the future. I can promise I'll try, he said. Johanna nodded. That's different. It was. Over the following months, their relationship continued changing in small ways. Bradley stopped asking whether she had forgiven him. Johanna stopped assuming every kindness came with an expectation. He brought groceries when Micah was sick. She called him when Bradley's father made another public statement through his attorneys. They disagreed about Micah's school. They disagreed about screen time. They disagreed about whether a 7-year-old needed 3 different kinds of basketball shoes. But they learned something they had never managed to learn during their marriage. A disagreement did not have to become a war. One Saturday morning, Bradley arrived early. Johanna opened the door. You're 20 minutes early. I know. Why? Traffic was light. She raised an eyebrow. You planned for traffic. I've been learning. She stepped aside. Come in. Bradley walked inside. Micah came running down the hallway. You're here. I am. We're building the robot today. Bradley looked at Johanna. You didn't tell me about a robot. Micah answered for her. I did. Bradley laughed. Apparently you did. They spent the morning on the living room floor. There were wires everywhere. At one point, Micah became frustrated and pushed the pieces away. I can't do it. Bradley didn't immediately fix it. Instead, he said, let's figure out what went wrong. Micah looked at him. What if we can't? Then we'll try again. Johanna watched from the kitchen. She remembered the man she had married. He would have solved the problem himself. He would have shown Micah the fastest way. He would have moved on. This Bradley sat beside the boy for nearly an hour. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to repair his marriage. He was simply there. And perhaps that was when Johanna finally understood that his transformation was real, because he wasn't performing it for her anymore. He was becoming someone different, whether she rewarded him or not. That evening, after Bradley left, Johanna stood alone in the kitchen. She looked at the empty chair where he had been sitting. She didn't know what the future held. She wasn't ready to call him her husband again. Maybe she never would. But for the first time in years, the question no longer frightened her. She wasn't choosing between loving Bradley and protecting herself. She was learning that she could do both carefully. And if there was ever going to be a second chance between them, it would not come from forgetting the first marriage. It would come from building something neither of them had known how to build before. The photograph was still on Bradley's phone. He had never deleted it. For a long time, he couldn't. It had been the reason he called Johanna, the reason he had walked back into a life he thought was finished. The reason he had discovered that the worst thing he had ever believed about his family was not true. At first, whenever he looked at it, he saw the little boy beside Johanna and felt the old shock all over again. He saw the keepsake in Micah's hand. He remembered the hospital, the grief, the funeral, the years. He remembered how completely certain he had been that his son was gone. Then he remembered Johanna's voice. You trusted your father when you should have trusted me. For months, that sentence had followed him everywhere. But now, when he looked at the photograph, he saw something different. Not only what had been taken from him, he saw what the photograph had forced him to become. It was a Saturday evening, and Bradley was sitting on Johanna's couch. Micah was on the floor, surrounded by crayons, paper, and pieces of a mechanical model that had somehow become much larger than the instructions promised. Johanna was in the kitchen. She was arguing with Micah about dinner. "I am not eating peas. You haven't even tried them. I tried them last year. That was last year. They tasted green." Bradley laughed. Johanna called from the kitchen. "Don't encourage him. I'm staying out of this." "You are absolutely encouraging him." Micah looked at Bradley. "She thinks peas are good," Bradley whispered. "I heard." Johanna appeared in the doorway holding a bowl. "Both of you are impossible." Micah grinned. Bradley looked at them. For a moment, nothing happened. No revelation. No dramatic conversation. No phone call. No crisis. Just a kitchen light, a child complaining about vegetables, and Johanna standing there with a tired smile on her face. It was ordinary, and Bradley realized that ordinary was exactly what he had spent years overlooking. His phone vibrated. He picked it up. The photograph was still there. He opened it. Johanna noticed him looking at the screen. "What?" Bradley locked the phone. "Nothing." She narrowed her eyes. "That usually means something." Bradley looked toward Micah. The boy was trying to draw a truck with 6 wheels. Bradley smiled. "I'm just glad I came." Johanna stopped. She understood what he meant. Not only tonight, not only to her house. He meant that morning, the school presentation, the investigation, the uncomfortable conversations, the moments when he could have walked away because the truth was too painful. He meant coming back when he had no guarantee that anyone would forgive him. Johanna looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You should have come a long time ago." Bradley nodded. "I know." There was no argument, no defense. He didn't say that he had been busy. He didn't explain the company. He didn't remind her that he had loved her. He simply accepted it. Micah looked up from the floor. "Are you guys fighting?" Johanna smiled. "No." "Are you sure?" Bradley laughed. "Very sure." Micah went back to his drawing. Johanna sat beside Bradley. Their shoulders didn't touch. Neither moved closer. They didn't need to. There were still things between them that had not been solved. Johanna still had scars from the years when she had felt alone inside her own marriage. Bradley still carried guilt over the choices he had made. They were not magically healed. They were not pretending the past had never happened. They were simply learning how to live differently. Bradley looked at Micah again. The boy had begun adding details to the truck. A steering wheel, a ladder, a tiny person sitting inside. Bradley smiled. "I think that's supposed to be me." Micah looked at the drawing. "No." Bradley raised an eyebrow. "It's your mum." Johanna laughed. "Why am I driving?" "Because you always know where we're going." Bradley looked at Johanna. She looked back at him. Neither said anything, but something about the sentence stayed with Bradley. For most of his life, he had assumed being the person in control meant knowing exactly where everyone was going. Now he understood that sometimes love meant trusting another person enough to walk beside them without demanding the steering wheel. Later that night, Bradley stood outside beside his car. He looked back at the house. Johanna was visible through the kitchen window. Micah was beside her. The scene was quiet. No reporters, no investors, no board members, no family lawyers, just a home. Bradley slipped his phone into his pocket. The photograph was still there, but it no longer represented something stolen from him. It represented the moment his old life had ended, and perhaps, without him realizing it at the time, the moment he had finally been given the chance to build a better one. He had once believed his greatest responsibility was protecting everything he had built. Now he understood something much harder. Providing for people was not the same as being present for them. Money could pay for a house. It could pay for a hospital. It could pay for lawyers, investigators, schools, cars, vacations, and every comfortable thing a person could imagine. But it could not buy back a missed birthday. It could not sit beside a frightened child at night. It could not undo the loneliness of a wife who had stopped asking for help. And it certainly could not purchase trust once it had been broken. Bradley had learned that apologies mattered, but apologies were only the beginning. Trust came afterward, slowly, through consistency, through accountability, through showing up when nobody was applauding. And Johanna had learned something too. Forgiving someone did not mean pretending they had never hurt you. It did not require returning to the life you had before. Sometimes forgiveness simply meant refusing to let the worst thing someone had done determine the rest of your life. Inside the house, Micah called Bradley's name. "Bradley." He turned. "Yeah? Come look." Bradley opened the door. "I'm coming." And this time, he didn't make the boy wait. Sometimes, the people we love don't need us to provide more. They need us to be there. Bradley spent years believing that protecting his family meant building a successful company, making money, solving problems, and making sure nobody had to worry about the future. But while he was busy securing tomorrow, he was losing today. He missed conversations. He missed moments with Johanna. He missed the ordinary experiences that can never be purchased once they're gone. And when he finally discovered that the son he had spent 7 years mourning was alive, he had to face a painful truth. Finding his son again did not erase the years he had missed. It didn't erase Johanna's pain. It didn't automatically restore their marriage. It didn't make his apologies enough. What changed Bradley was understanding that love is not measured only by what we provide. It is also measured by our presence, our attention, our willingness to listen, and our consistency when nobody is watching. And Johanna's journey mattered just as much. She learned that protecting herself did not mean she had to keep every door permanently closed. But forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean pretending the past didn't happen. And it certainly did not mean she owed Bradley another marriage. She was allowed to forgive him and still choose carefully what happened next. That is what made their second chance meaningful. They didn't try to recreate the family they had lost. They began building a different one, a healthier one based less on control and more on trust, less on promises and more on actions. And perhaps that's the part of their story worth remembering, because sometimes we think we need a dramatic second chance to change our lives, but often change begins with something much smaller. Answering the phone, showing up when you said you would, listening instead of defending yourself, putting the phone down, sitting beside someone, admitting I was wrong, and then proving it through what you do next. Because when trust is broken, an apology may open the door, but consistent action is what gives someone a reason to leave it open. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment and think about your own life. Is there someone you love who may not need another promise from you, but simply needs you to be present? Maybe it's a spouse, a parent, a child, a sibling, or someone you haven't spoken to in years. Sometimes we wait for the perfect moment to make things right. But life doesn't always give us that moment. So, if there is someone who matters to you, don't assume there will always be another tomorrow. And if you believe second chances should be earned through actions, not just words, tell us in the comments, what does real forgiveness mean to you? Thank you for spending this time with us here at Daily Comfort Stories. If this story gave you something to think about, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, you cannot change yesterday, but you can decide what you do with today. We'll see you in the next story.